Moreover, I think altogether for Latinos, in my culture is like we yell, we're loud. Like I just don't like that at all. And then I see myself doing that with my family, and I was like, what is happening? So there is that
Yeah.
moment of, okay, we identify it, and then how do we intentionally change it, so that we
Hmm.
show up differently in our relationships.
Well, you brought up so many important points because so I'm thinking when you said I have my dogs, my animal. I heard dogs, but you said animals.
Mhm.
What kind of pets do you have?
I have dogs. I love
Dog,
dogs.
okay.
But my friends have cats, and I used to be one of those like I hate cats, and then I'm like now so fascinated by cats because
Yeah,
they're
yeah.
incredibly interesting creatures. And altogether, I've always liked to be around animals. I think that's if
Yeah.
I feel like my mother has given me a dog when I was a child, like I asked for it, I would now be a vet and be very happy instead of being in the entertainment industry, still trying to get some kind of like understanding of
Yeah.
life.
Well, so this was interesting to me. The place about the pets. So I'm going to go into this term co-regulation, right?
Mhm.
So co-regulation is when your body finds a sense of safety in another body. That can be plants, that can be the ocean, that can be humans, that can be animals, like anything that's alive. It's not just people. So what's interesting, and it's why I like the somatic lens of attachment style, is when you go into that, you realize there's much more nuance. So we're calling you
Mhm.
avoidant attachment, which gives you this like fixed identity, but you're not avoidant with animals, right?
Oh
Like
no. And my plants, I mean, you see my monstera
I'm
behind me
looking
is
at the
like
plant, I'm like,
I bought
yeah,
this at like Home Depot and literally it was the size of this coffee cup. And when I look at this thing and I'm
yeah.
like, I'm gonna have to buy a house so you can live in it because this plant does
I
not fit in LA living
I have
anymore.
the same plant, and it's in this big room over there because it's
It's
ginormous.
giant. Yeah.
But it's important as part of the nuance of the somatic attachment theory because it is a fluid, nuanced, flexible expression rather than a fixed, stamped identity. So when you get overwhelmed by a human body, let's say, or you feel unseen by a human body, or you just feel satiated from a human body, your physical body naturally moves to other bodies. So even though
Mm,
we're calling it avoidant isolation, you're not really isolating. You're with plants, you're with animals, and you're with yourself. So I'm
mhm,
saying this to like humanize and destigmatize these attachment styles because they're beautiful. It's like what we call avoidant is just the way you manage overwhelm with people. So nothing wrong with that. Now, what gets interesting just under the avoidant, umbrella is in that isolation from people, do you disconnect from yourself or do you connect to yourself? And that's like a question for
mm.
everyone listening. And if you want to answer that, you're free to.
Yeah, that's really interesting because we all have these managing tactics, when we do feel emotional or we don't want to handle our feelings, which has been like, incredible amounts of exercise and drinking and weed smoking. And, you can go on a TV. For me, I realized a
Hmm.
big one is television. The moment
Hmm.
I'm watching 10 episodes of a murder show, you bet that I'm
That's
depressed.
how you know. That's right.
That's how I know.
That's
When
right.
I hit episode 5, I'm like, why I'm still watching some murder show that's making me feel so terrible. And I'm like, oh
Mm.
yeah, something is going on.
Hmm.
So I try my best to very intentionally turn on the television and be like, I want to watch things that are uplifting, that are scripted, that have
Hmm.
some kind of purpose. But I now start to do the self work. And I, mentioned in a previous episode that I wished somebody had come to me and said,
Mm.
self work is amazing because it
Hmm.
changed my life. I started buying self work books, one after the other after a very painful breakup where I was like, how did
Hmm.
I not see this coming? And it changed my life. And from that, I
Hmm.
started doing classes and courses and, different things. I just went to the Hoffman process. I mean, that was so interesting and life changing as well. And at the end of the day, I always say, man, if I was 20 when somebody had told me, like, pick a book and understand yourself, I would have
Right.
been a different person.
And
So
maybe at 20
now,
you would have been like, fuck off. Maybe you wouldn't have
yeah, I'd
understood
be like,
it.
whatever.
Yeah,
I
like
know
now
what
you
I'm
have the
doing.
capacity for it. That's right. That's
Yeah.
right. Because what you're saying is important because there's nothing, again, I don't even like to stigmatize disconnection. If you
Hmm.
isolate, and in that isolation, and this is another word I wanted to bring in, capacity. If you don't have the capacity to be with those sensations, you're going to
Hmm.
watch ten murder mysteries. Like that's just what's going to happen. So we want to also see that as a signal of I'm wrong, I should stop this, but this is telling me I don't have capacity to be with myself right now. Once
Yeah.
I do have capacity to be with myself, then we connect to ourselves in isolation, which means we build capacity to then go out and connect to the other. And this is like the bigger piece of your question around relationship. Relationship is less about love and more about capacity, which I find like fascinating the more and more I experience it in my relationships and other people's. Love is like a felt sense, and sometimes it's even an idea, but capacity is your biology. It's your actual ability to connect, to be
Hmm.
vulnerable, to witness somebody, to have accountability, like share space. All these things come from capacity. That has nothing to do with love. You can deeply, deeply love somebody unconditionally and lack the capacity to be next to them sometimes. So when we take capacity into the conversation, we bring it in relationally, we gain this whole new language around actually checking in with where we are and then
Hmm.
reporting it to our partner, not in like an analytical robotic way, but like in a human way. Like right now I'm so exhausted, I can't even talk. I just need to lay down and close my eyes in a room by myself. And you normalize this in your relationships, like it's not weird or rude, you're just telling your partner where your body is. We hopefully do this intimately, like when we're having sex with someone, if something doesn't feel good or it's not working for us, we want to be able to say that. So why don't we do that conversationally, sharing space, sharing
Hmm.
finances? Like it should all come in if we see capacity in that way.
I love this because what we're saying, listening to you is that these places that we go to is not who we are. Like, I'm not
That's right.
avoidant. I am not incapable of self analysis and understanding. I'm just in that moment when I'm not capable for whatever reason. And I think
That's
that's
right.
so great. I think of my last relationship and when, I was very triggered for whatever reason. And I'm like, I need to have this conversation now. And now looking back, I'm like, he was at work and he wasn't in a right place. And like, there is no
Mm-hmm.
relationship emergency. Like, this could have waited, whatever, how long. But he wasn't someone who could say to me, this is not the right time or place. I will be available within, I don't know, 2 days. I'll come back to you. Just give me 2 days, which I would have
Mm-hmm.
been like, okay, I can do that. I think there's a lot to do with that as well. Is like not being capable of having those dialogues of saying,
Mm-hmm.
I need space to close my eyes and not have this conversation right now, but I will come back to you because I care, whatever, X, Y, Z. And I think
Mm-hmm.
withholding and stonewalling becomes a way of coping that I think it's very damaging. I mean, I've done it too. I've been those people too who've been like, oh, you did this. I'm just going to ignore you to show you and
Yep.
punish you of all the
That's
things
right.
you've done. And it's just so destructive to any relationship. And I just started seeing someone new and he asked me like, so what's your attachment style? And I remember thinking, oh man, I'm like, well, I would say though, I feel like I think what I said was like, I think my attachment style is anxious. So if I fall in love with you, don't worry, I'm totally gonna freak out.
You're there.
And
You're not going. Yeah.
it's like it's immediately, it's firstly I'm like super chill and I'm feeling like, oh, everything's fine, like, whatever. Then out of the sudden it's like a switch and I'm like, oh my God. And the sense of like inherited
Mm.
like abandonment, the fear of that
That's
lives in my
right.
body is
That's right.
so I know where it's coming from. I've done some work on, somatically releasing that and reliving those childhood experiences that made me um have that in my body and live in that place sometimes. So I'm curious to see if I do get their place there, then that's going to manifest the same way. But at the same time, it was very funny to me to realize, like, yeah, if I fall in love with you, don't worry, I'm going to freak out. It's going to be a mess,
Right, right. You like
because
like the disclaimer. This is
yeah,
how my body
exactly.
works. Well, this is what's important about that to me. I mean, again, there's so much swirling in my mind what you're saying. I love that you keep saying capable because that's another word for capacity. Like, what am I capable of right now? And I always like to highlight right now because it changes from person to person, environment to environment, day to day. If I didn't get a lot of sleep, my capacity for connection is very different than
Hmm.
if I get a lot of sleep. So it's fluid. It's just like how you said your attachment style is not who you are. It's not. Your attachment style is something your body's doing. It's not who you are. And it shifts over time. And sometimes it's really good. Sometimes to be avoidant is like a great response to a situation that isn't working for you. So I think
Right.
when we take that into consideration and you even say like releasing things from the past that would contribute to anxious attachment, let's say, the next step is capacity. Like can I tend to my capacity in moments where I feel abandoned? So, can I literally create the capacity for abandonment? Which sounds like super radical, but it's the only way to actually secure the body. Otherwise, the moment that partner is unreachable, they're gone for a couple of days, they're angry and need space. If you don't have that capacity for them walking away from you, the anxious attachment style will have to emerge because you'll have a desperation for connection.
And that happened in my last relationship, and unfortunately ended up being someone that had a narcissistic personality trait. And so it was very
Hmm.
much amplified, back to
Hmm.
that what you attract, which is more like for me, what you choose subconsciously.
That's
There I
right.
was reenacting the same patterns that I seen as a child. But I remember falling in love with that person and calling my therapist and being in a state of panic. My body was shaking. I was on the phone with her. He had gone to a party that, I could tell it wasn't true that he could invite me. I knew he just
Hmm.
didn't want me to go. And instead of addressing that and saying, hey, okay, our relationship is new, I don't have to go to the same with you, but it makes me feel this way. Can we talk about it? I just pretended it was fine, totally had a meltdown, never saw that therapist
Mm.
again because she didn't know
Mm.
how to handle it. Instead, she sent me some video from some online dating guru that was very destructive, that led me to like say kind of like, an ultimatum kind of thing the next day. And that became the dwindling of the relationship because there was really no dialogue. He was like, well, you did this and I'm feeling this way. So you do this or it's over. And I'm like,
Hmm.
that's not exactly what I said, but that's not really the way that I need to what I want to be or show up in a relationship. But listening to you, I'm like, yeah, like I work very hard like to identify where these abandoned places live with me. And like this is a
Hmm.
photo of myself when I was 9 years old.
Mm. Mm.
And I keep it on my desk. And I'm like,
Hmm.
sometimes I look at her and I say to her, like, I got you, like I'm here for
Yep.
you. My mother, that was the year my father died. My life was just an uproar. My mother never had to figured out how to be a single mother of two. And I felt many things. I interpreted life in many specific ways that inform my life now. And I look at me as that child and, I embrace her sometimes in my dreams and I keep her and I say, I got
Hmm.
you. And working on those abandonment feelings that now I think live very differently myself than it did when I was in that relationship a year ago.
Yeah, even when you said dialogue, like you weren't able to go into a dialogue with that person,
Mm-hmm.
that the two things kind of come up for me with that. One is like urgency, right? So if I can't go into dialogue, there's usually urgency, and urgency is always a sign that you're in a trauma response. So you're not even, I don't like to always say control. I like to more like to say conscious. Like you're not consciously in that moment creating. You are being driven by a desperate
Mm-hmm.
force that's not even your fault. It's something your body's doing. So I like that you said that. And the second thing that came up was curiosity. Like true dialogue is only born from curiosity, and capacity and curiosity are interesting because to be curious means I don't know. Like, I don't know what you're going to say. I don't know what it's going to mean. I don't know if you're going to agree with me. That takes some serious capacity. Because if I can look
Mm-hmm.
you and say, you abandoned me, you're a horrible person, there's no curiosity there. I'm
Mm-hmm.
telling you my story about you, even if it hurts, but it's at least a story that I know is, quote, true. It's like I can rely on it. But to say to you, like, tell me when I felt abandoned, what was actually happening for you? There has to be a space in me to even have the capacity, the ability to hear your answer and be curious and open to it being different from my story. That's like a
Mm-hmm.
huge ego death that we go through in relationships every day. To say who I think you are is my story. You tell me each day who you are and what you're feeling, rather than I'm going to tell you.
And not see the partner as the other. I
Exactly.
my mother raised us as a single mother, so there was a lot. She was in terrible marriages, so there was a lot of like men are bad and they want this or that from you, and so I grew up with that
Hmm.
subconsciously. And as I've met my first husband, who kind of reenacted that and
Hmm.
made me believe that she was right, I now think about that with my male friends. One of my male friends gave me a book called The Will to Change that talks about the male experience, and how baby boys are raised very differently from baby
Hmm.
girls, and how he told me as one of the most sensitive men that I know, he's like, I've had girlfriends who said I want you to be sensitive, and I cry and they say, well, not that sensitive, and they
Hmm.
shut it
Hmm.
down.
It's true.
So with this, with this relationship but a year ago, I felt like as I became more afraid of being abandoned, he became more and more the other. And I was more and more separating myself and protecting myself. I mean, obviously, it didn't help that he turned out to be, narcissistic in trait. Now I try to find compassion for that person. I have for
Mm,
a long time tried to find forgiveness, and I said I forgiven him, and I don't think I really did, but I think maybe more powerfully would be compassion.
mm,
He didn't have the capacity. I believe he loved. I believed he
mhm,
believed he loved, but coming up and growing up in the way that he did, he never had that capacity to really feel those feelings, really be available in that way. And he's not someone who's doing the work, so maybe we'll never have that capacity. When he turned up again, to tell me how I was wrong about everything and he needed to tell his side of the story, I said, "Sure, I'm listening." And it became very clear that you're not listening,
mhm.
and it was one of those things that you just go, okay, well, this is what it is. And I accept that you just don't have that capacity. But now that I am in a different place, a year later, I finally start to engage again in romantic relationships. I gave myself the time to self reflect and work on myself and address those places that needed that, like you're saying, like those immediate, that emergency reaction of back in this place of a child. It's interesting now because now I joke, I'm like, I heal too much, I can't get there, but I think it's now the
Mm.
avoidant thing. I'm like, oh, do I want to get there again
That's right.
and live, or kind of risk living those things again, and like how do we take that
Mhm.
leap?
Well, it's even seeing there's two things there for me. It's seeing narcissism also as a spectrum the way we're seeing attachment style. Like I don't believe someone is just fixed narcissistic. I think it's an expression that comes from extreme fear of intimacy. And what we know with narcissists, especially if you've experienced one, there is so much control and manipulation to keep them from getting hurt. So it's really an expression of extreme low capacity for feeling, uneasy feelings and vulnerabilities, which comes from their childhood traumatic
Hmm.
experiences. So I like that kind of case study of here's someone with a narcissistic expression, here's someone with anxious attachment. That is like a trauma bond made in heaven, because
Yeah.
because like
Yep.
that anxious attachment style, that anxious expression from your body or anyone's body is saying, I don't care what happens, I just need you. And then narcissistic expression says, this person is desperate, I can do anything I want, they're going to stay. So these two bodies come together and they actually find a strange false sense of security in these trauma responses relationally. So there's even understanding that and then doing the uncoupling work, which is to disassociate, not dissociate, but disassociate the idea that relationships are that from your future relationships. So, like the
Right.
one you're in now, noticing when your body is like Pavlovian and that kind of style, associating this man with that other one, and coloring and toning him through that experience, and helping them be separate. Okay, what's different about this one from that one, so your body can update to this relationship so it doesn't repeat what it was doing or reflexively go avoidant out of fear.
I mean, that's so true. That is so true. And what happens, I mean, I'm sure, and this is the first time for me, and I love that you said that these two trauma bonded, because the more I allow myself to feel emotional feelings for someone new, more I feel like a little bit of a death of what that was. And
That's right.
I have these flashes of those experiences. And, like the other day, I cried in my car and I was like, oh, that was so hurtful. But I'm like, why am I feeling this a year later today? And I came to realize, oh, because today I opened up to this new person a little bit more. And it
Mm,
was an
hmm.
interesting way to almost like I have to, I don't know, heal through. I guess you have to be allowing yourself to open up to someone who emotionally you kind of have, there's no other choice than to heal and let go of what the past was. And
Well,
maybe it
even you
was,
saying that well, that's the real time uncoupling. So like when you're opening up to him emotionally, as terrifying as that is, and then nothing bad happens, your body's able to say, "Oh, this is different from that." So even when you say that, I
oh,
have to open up to heal. That's exactly what that means.
because that was the first time for me. I was so confused. I'm like, why does it mean I still like that other guy? But now hearing you talk about how that trauma bonding is, it felt like home. I
That's
and I
right.
and it felt
Because it
like,
was home. That was home for you growing up.
yeah,
So your
exactly.
body
And that
knows that.
wasn't a good thing.
Oh, and that's what's fascinating about trauma. So traumatized nervous systems, they don't care about actual like safety. They care about familiarity. So if some man feels like that because your body's used to that, your body knows how to manage that now. Even if it's like abusive and horrible and oppressive, like your body knows that. Trauma hates the unknown. I should say a traumatized system hates the unknown. So your nervous system being with someone that's maybe like polite and kind and more vulnerable and sensitive is going to be terrifying for your system because that's unknown. You don't know what to do in that situation. So when it's a trauma bond, the body's always going to pick what it's already known and what it's already been with.